My name is Neil, I'm from Knack Training, and in today's Everyday Office, we're going to record an absolute reference macro. So a couple of things here. First of all, recording a macro means that Excel is going to watch what I do so that later it can repeat those same steps to simplify my life, to shorten the amount of time it takes me to accomplish a given task. And an absolute reference macro is a macro where the places that we go in the macro, the cells that we click on, the rows and columns we click on, are recorded very specifically so that Excel will always go to those exact same rows, exact same columns, and do the exact same thing. The first thing you've got to do to be able to record a macro is you need to have a developer tab up at the top of the screen. If you don't have the developer tab, just right-click on the ribbon, choose Customize the ribbon, and when you go to Customize the ribbon, you'll want to make sure that the developer checkbox is checked on this right-hand panel. Once you've confirmed that that is, you click OK, and as you can see up here on the developer tab, you have the ability to record this macro. Now, when you hit record macro, you're going to be asked to give this thing a name. The names of macros cannot have empty spaces in them. So I like to use camel case, capitalizing the first letter of every new word. So for instance, if I've got this normal set of data that it dumps out and I need to handle it every time, maybe I call this one data cleanup macro. Something along those lines. Now, be very careful about assigning this a keyboard shortcut. You don't want to assign it Control-C for cleanup because Control-C is copy, right? So you don't want to overwrite the copy keyboard shortcut here. One way to make that happen is if you hold down the Shift key and press D, for example, for data cleanup, or Control-Shift-C for cleanup, or whatever the case may be, you can always assign the macro that keyboard shortcut in that way. Or you could just leave this off. You don't have to have a keyboard shortcut assigned to a given macro. I'm actually going to leave mine off for the time being because I want to go ahead and use this in a different way. Now, the second thing that we're going to want to the third thing, is whether this should go into the personal macro workbook, which is the workbook that runs on your hard drive and is accessible every time you open Excel, or whether I want to save this into the current workbook that I'm working on. Let's say that I'm constantly importing data from some outside data source to this spreadsheet specifically. I might decide to just have that macro available in this workbook specifically. And then lastly, before we hit OK and it begins recording, this is actually very important. As somebody who has done programming in the past, I can tell you that the biggest thing that people forget about is the fact that about 6 months from now, you're going to have no idea what this was about. So you want to be able to describe this in very plain English so that you can go back, read it, and see what 6 months ago you was thinking about. So I'm going to say this is for removing extra columns and formatting data dump from XYZ database. Created 11/12/17 by N. Malek, or something along those lines, so that I can see what the point of this was, where the data is coming from, when I created it, who created it. You know, if you're looking at somebody else's macro, it's always a good idea to go, hey, I wonder who I can bother to find out what that macro is all about. And then I click OK. And when I click OK, Excel is watching everything I do. You can see that because now it says stop recording up here at the top. So let's say, for example, that I decide that I always need to have labels at the tops of all the columns. If I click on the first row, remember this is an absolute reference macro. Excel is going to remember that I clicked on the first row specifically. Right-click and insert a new row up here. Maybe I call this one, maybe I call this property ID. Maybe I call this date initiated, date sold, property type, property subtype, city, state, country, region, sale type, manager, salesperson. This might be, let's say, probably acquisition cost, maybe maintenance, taxes, sale price, and commission. Now, next up, we have probably some extra information in here. Maybe I don't need the property ID or the date initiated. I can right-click on those columns and delete them. Maybe I don't need the manager or the salesperson or the acquisition cost or the maintenance or the taxes. I can right-click on those and delete those. Maybe I just need a little sales table based off the date sold and that sort of thing. Then maybe I want to come in here, highlight that first row and bold it and maybe put a little line underneath it. Maybe I want to expand the column widths so that it fits all the data. Maybe I need to go to the date sold column and make these dates, or the sale price column and make these accounting, and the commission column and make these percentages. Okay, so now I have cleaned up this data. I can go to my developer tab at the top of the screen and stop recording. And if next month I click here and I see, okay, it's the same basic data, but it's a new set, I can go up to the developer tab at the top of the screen, click on macros, and here is that data cleanup macro that we were just creating a second ago. When I hit run, you can see here it adjusts the column widths, it formats the numbers, it removes the extra columns, it does everything I want it to the February numbers. Now, you saw me go to the macros button here and run the data cleanup macro with the run button. Another way to make this happen is on the drop-down menu on the quick access toolbar up here at the top of the screen. You can trace down to more commands. And then on the left-hand panel, this drop-down menu here where it says popular commands, you can switch over to macros and say, I'd like to add the data cleanup macro to my quick access toolbar. So click add. Now, when I have it over here on the right, I can choose the modify button. And remember, data cleanup, maybe that looks like, I don't know, like that button right there. And maybe this is just called cleanup now, and hit OK and hit OK. And now I have a button up here for cleaning up the data that if I go over here to March's numbers, for example, I can hit the cleanup button and it'll do all of my data fixing for me.